fellas, just when I thought the UFC were done announcing fights because they'd announced so much, they've got announced even more fights, which we're going to get into. Starting off with Justin Gaethje versus Raffael Fiziev for the co-main event of UFC 313. Obviously, it was supposed to be Gaethje versus Hooker. Hooker pulls out. And then there's this big controversy over who Justin Gaethje fights. And I'm happy with Raffael Fiziev. I selected him as one of my potential opponents for Justin Gaethje. He was the number 2 guy I thought should have fought him. And I'm very happy with Raffael Fiziev. And I think this is going to be a banger of a fight. Now, obviously, we've seen this fight before at UFC. I think it was 286 on the Edwards-Usman card, and it was a really good fight, just as we expected it to be. And I expect the same thing this time around, and I think this time around it makes a lot of sense because they both need to kind of get a win. Fiziev's just been in, well, I said just been, he's been out for ages because he got injured by Gamrot. Gaethje got knocked out by Max Holloway a year ago from now, so it's kind of like a redemption fight for both of them in the co-main event, a comeback fight, if you will, for both of them now. It is only going to be 3 rounds, unlike the 5 rounds that I think was originally scheduled for Dan Hooker versus Justin Gaethje, which is going to be, I guess, a bit disappointing, but I understand why. It's on short notice. I would have liked to see them go 5 rounds, and I doubt neither of them would have rejected a 5-round fight, but either way, Dan Hooker, Justin Gaethje versus Raffael Fiziev, I think it honestly saves UFC 313. Dare I even say it's going to be more competitive than Justin Gaethje versus Dan Hooker? I'm not saying Fiziev's earned it as much as Dan Hooker did, but I think it's definitely a much more competitive fight because of the striking of Fiziev. We saw it the first fight. A lot of people thought Fiziev won the first fight as well, so Gaethje versus Fiziev for the co-main event of UFC 313. I'm happy with that fight. Another fight announcement we've got is Silva versus Bryce Mitchell for UFC 314. I don't know why they keep adding fights to 314. I'm not complaining, but I feel like this card is starting to become overstacked. But either way, obviously, Silva just knocked out Melzik Bagdasarian at UFC Seattle. Straight away, rocks the mic and calls out Bryce Mitchell for a fight eventually at some card. And now they've got the fight booked for UFC 314 between Bryce Mitchell and Silva. And I like the fight a lot. I think there's a lot of hype around this matchup because Silva is one of the biggest prospects right now in the featherweight division. Bryce Mitchell, because of what he's been going out and saying, has been getting talked about a lot in the featherweight division. And I'm just excited for the fight between the two of them. It's either going to be Bryce Mitchell fraud-checking Silva and getting a win that nobody expected, or it's going to be Silva brutalizing Bryce Mitchell, potentially even worse than the way, well, I don't think you can get even worse than the way that Josh Emmett did, but maybe on par with just how bad Josh Emmett did it as well. But this could easily be Silva's coming out party. He's called for this fight, and short notice for Silva. This isn't even short notice. The fight's in April, but short notice for Silva ain't an issue. He's fought on 2 weeks' notice before when he faced Drew Dober and beat him. I do think Silva beats Bryce Mitchell. He's a stylistic nightmare. I think we could see him go out and put a beating on Bryce Mitchell, similar to the way that Ilia Topuria did. Again, maybe we could see Bryce Mitchell lay and pray Silva, just like he has done to a couple of other opponents. But I do think this is going to be the Silva coming out party, where he brutalizes Bryce Mitchell. Dana White was quick to get this fight out as soon as Silva called him out, so Dana White obviously has some sort of feelings towards Bryce Mitchell. But either way, another banger fight added to UFC 314. And can we just take a minute to talk about 314 and how stacked this card is? Like, we already knew this was going to be an extremely stacked card after the announcements that Dana made last week. Adding Bryce Mitchell versus Silva to the card, I mean, just look at the card from top to bottom. This is probably the UFC 300 equivalent of 2025. Like, it's in April. It's a stacked card. I think this might go down as the most stacked card of this year. I know this is only the 4th fight of the year, or the 3rd pay-per-view of the year even, but maybe 317 because that's International Fight Week could be better, but this card is stacked. But Bryce Mitchell versus Silva, I'm excited for the fight. I'm glad they've booked it pretty soon as well, only a few days after Silva fought. They've been going at each other online, and I think it's one of the most hyped up fights right now in the featherweight division. We've also got Jamal Hill versus Khalil Rountree booked for UFC. I forgot which card it's on, but I think it's Kansas City. This fight has been booked for. Amazing main event, especially for a fight night as well, considering they've just been on pay-per-views. Now, obviously, this fight was supposed to be for UFC 303 last year, just after Jamal Hill got knocked out by Alex Pereira, and now it's been rescheduled now that Jamal Hill's just been knocked out by Yuri Prochazka. So it seems like Jamal Hill's quick turnaround rebound fights after getting knocked out always seems to be Khalil Rountree, which isn't a favourable matchup, but this is a really fun fight because obviously Khalil Rountree just went out there and had that amazing performance against Alex Pereira where he kind of proved he's a top contender. Hill, former champion, still very dangerous, and it's proved it more than Rountree, but has been knocked out in his last 2 fights and didn't perform as well against Poton as Rountree did. I think this is going to be a banger of a stand-up fight. I don't think it goes the distance. It is going to be obviously 5 rounds for a main event. I am leaning towards Rountree because Hill's just been knocked out, and you really look at Hill's resume. He's never really faced anybody like Khalil Rountree before, and you look at the performances against Alex, but that's going to be a really good fight for UFC Kansas City. Hill versus Rountree. I think if Rountree wins this fight again, he's straight back in the title mix, and I guess same for Hill if he wins as well. So that's a banger of a fight that we've got for UFC Kansas City. And you just look at the Kansas City fight card as well, another stacked card. You've got Jamal Hill versus Rountree. Anthony Smith probably going to get ran over by Ming Yang Zhang, who's the most dangerous light heavyweight prospect. We've got we've got David Onama versus Giga Chikadze, which is a really good featherweight fight. Michel Pereira versus Abbas Magomedov, the battle of the gas tanks, whoever's going to gas out first, but that should be a good fight. And they're obviously trying to bring Magomedov into the rankings. Ikram Aliskerov returning after getting knocked out by Whittaker against Andre Muniz. That's why that fight's been announced like 4 times. But yeah, UFC Kansas City, even though the fight card isn't even complete, already looking like it's going to be a proper stacked fight night card. I mean, look at the card. You've got the return of Matt Schnell. You've got Cameron Salmon back on the card. You've got a couple of prospects. That's also a really good card. So Jamal Hill, Rountree, looking forward to it. We've also got Marlon Vera versus Mario Batista. Again, I forgot which card this has been announced for, but Marlon Vera is going to be taking on Mario Batista. Yeah, this is a fight that, again, I kind of think it makes sense. Mario Batista fighting up, Marlon Vera fighting down. I know a lot of people kind of want to see Mario Batista in a firefight, and this is going to go one of 2 ways. We're either going to see Mario Batista put in a boring performance and hold Marlon Vera against the cage, which, if anything, is going to have a better chance of doing than he did against Aldo, considering that Vera is a terrible grappler. So I actually think this is a very winnable fight for Mario Batista. Or, hopefully, we could see Marlon Vera go out there and get another knockout as he used to do, collect another knockout over Mario Batista, warm the hearts of MMA fans by getting Batista out of there and scoring a knockout and getting back in the winning column and proving that Batista's not a top opponent. But I think this is a good fight either way. Mario Batista, listen, as much as he's disliked in the MMA community, he has the chance to do the funniest thing and make this an extremely boring fight and become the biggest heel in the bantamweight division, which I'm excited to see if he doesn't manage to hold up Marlon Vera against the cage, which I think he will, because if he can do it to Aldo with great takedown defense, what's going to stop him from doing it to Marlon Vera? But you never know. Mario Batista lacks the pressure a lot. Marlon Vera could just front kick him to the face. There's a lot of options for Marlon Vera in this fight. Other fight announcements on this, well, that we've got to go through, not massive fight announcements, but just some other fight announcements. We've got Dustin Jacoby versus Bruno Lopez. I think Jacoby runs through him. We've got GM3 taking on Brad Tavares, and that should be interesting because of the takedown defense of Tavares and the grappling of GM3. We've got Daniel Zeluba now taking on Austin Hubbard. It would have been good to see him take on Elvis Brenner, but I assume this is going to be a quick finish for Daniel Zeluba. And quite possibly one of the lowest level fights in the UFC, Junior Tafa taking on Tuco Tacos. This is quite possibly the lowest level fight we've seen in the UFC. Tuco Tacos isn't UFC worthy. Junior Tafa might be, and this isn't an exaggeration, but he might be the worst fighter right now in the UFC. So that's also a fight that's been announced, which I guess is going to be low level. We've also got news that there's going to be less Apex events in 2025. Apparently, the chief financial officer of TKO, which is obviously the partnership with the UFC, is trying to make there less UFC Apex events in 2025, which I hope is the case, and it seems to be the case with the rise of like named fight night locations. But yeah, the Apex, it's not even the Apex itself that I dislike with the fact that there's no crowd. It's merely the fact that the cards always suck. Like, we've got Manel Cap taking on Azuma Mabayev this weekend, and it's just not that good of a card. They kind of get skipped over. The UFC cards, they get a lot of hype around them, are obviously pay-per-views, but even just crowded fight nights. I mean, look how many people are talking about UFC Seattle, which just took place. So I hope we do see less Apex events in 2025. I know Dana said towards the end of 2024 this was his plan. We have only had 3 Apex events if we include this weekend this year, but I do hope we see less Apex events, more crowded fight nights events, because they're better to watch. The card's usually better. The atmosphere is better. So hopefully that is the case. But that's just a few fight announcements that we have going on in the UFC right now. Let me know your thoughts on these fight announcements. I can't wait for some of them. You know, Bryce Mitchell taking on Gene Silva, and obviously, you know, Jamal Hill versus Rountree. But there's some good fights on this card. Fiziev Gaethje as well. Good fights on certain cards that we're going to go over soon. But let me know your thoughts on these fight nights. Thank you for watching.